Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. My name is Tom Denenberg. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the Pizzigalli Center and to continue the conversation series. We are so pleased to partner, as we always do, with Shelburne Farms and All Souls Interfaith Gathering, and now the library in town. And also, RETN has joined us as a partner this year. And I want to thank our co-conspirators, Mary Abley, who couldn't be with us, Lara Keenan, who is here, Jess Wilson from RETN, our colleague, and Alec Webb, the director, and bring you all of their greetings. This is a wonderful way of sort of merging our community assets in the conversation about arts and culture and things that pertain to this part of the world. As always, we have Fran Stoddard, and so pleased to have Nissa, and Walter with us. And I would like Kim McCray to actually introduce the program, but I wanted to warmly welcome you to Shelburne Museum. Thank you.
So once again, good afternoon. My name is Kim McCray. I'm the Adult Programs Coordinator here at Shelburne Museum. And we are delighted today to be hosting, as Tom said, our Conversations Partnership Program with our 4 collaborating institutions. And we are highlighting the power of curiosity. And today is the 3rd installment of the 3-part program series on the power of curiosity. And we would like to thank as well Fran Stoddard, our mediator and conversation starter here today. And in addition to that, if anyone has a cell phone, I would just recommend putting it on silence for us to keep our conversation rolling. Although, I love dial tones these days, though, because ringtones can vary, and some of them are really good to dance to. So we could have a dance party if we wanted to. In addition, if you need a hearing boost, we do have assisted listening devices that are connected to our audio feed, and we do have them in the back, so if anyone needs one, just raise your hand. They are very handy to use, and they just slip right on over your ear. So, in addition, if you have not yet heard about our latest exhibition here at the museum that features the work of Walter Wick, it's opening this Saturday here at the museum, and Walter will be back on Saturday for a lecture at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so please feel free to join us, as well as check out the various I Spy books and products that are in our museum store as well. So without further ado, let's get the conversation started, and I'd like to turn it over to Fran. Thank you, Fran.
Thank you so much, Kim and Tom. So we were trying to guess in the last 2 conversations. This is actually the 5th year that we've been doing this, so it's thrilling to be in this space as well. The collaborative team from these great institutions designed the conversations this year to have 2 people who meet for the first time on this stage, and that's true again today. So Nissa and Walter Wick, Nissa Kauppila and Walter Wick just met a few minutes ago, and these are 2 artists who pique our sense of curiosity. One is quite seasoned and well known, and the other, from our own home state of Vermont, is new and very quickly up and coming. In the last 2 conversations, we covered the nature of curiosity from a standpoint of science, design, education, and performance through the lens of nature and spirituality and art. And today we're really focusing more on art and how it stimulates curiosity with these 2. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about who we're talking to. You'll see some of their work while I'm describing them, and then we'll go right into the conversation. So Walter Wick, first, is a graduate of Connecticut's, is it Pear College of Art?
Pear College.
Pear College of Art. Walter began his creative career as a commercial photographer, eventually creating photo illustrations for books and magazines more than 2 decades ago in 1991, actually with one of this image. Wick collaborated with writer Jean Marzolo on the popular I Spy Search and Find picture books, which boast over 43 million in print, and I bet that most of you are familiar with those. Among many prizes and accolades, his book, A Drop of Water, which is right here, which is really phenomenal and quite different from his other books. Won a Boston Globe Horn Book First Prize. His Walter Wick Optical Tricks, which is out in the store I saw, was named one of the best illustrated books by the New York Times. His images grace hundreds of covers of major magazines, including Newsweek, Discovery, and Psychology Today. He wrote his first Can You See What I See book. This is on his own, well, and with his major crew in 2002, with a mere 6.5 million of those books now in print. We welcome you, Walter Wick.
Thank
and
you.
you've seen some of his images. We can, so that's one of them. We'll go through others in a minute. Nissa Kauppila was born and raised just south of here in Moncton. And Kim will come up when here's one of her images. You might see a few more as we go through it. She went off to earn her Bachelor's of Fine Arts in film from the Rhode Island School of Design and returned home to Vermont for a Master's of Education at UVM. For the past 4 years, she's been teaching everything from digital media, animation, video game design, to documentary filmmaking and social studies at South Burlington High School. Somehow, she also carved out time to return to painting, and this was really just 4 years or so ago. Her work quickly gained attention. She won the South End Art Hop People's Choice Award in 2012 and again in 2013. She's now represented by Burlington City Arts and has exhibited in galleries locally and nationally. Recently, her art caught attention in China, and she's off in June for a year of teaching and painting in Shenzhen, which is in the south of China. So pretty exciting to have these two, and you have a sense of her work here. So we have two very different artists here, a photographer and a painter. And just to kind of warm us up, to get us, we'll talk about each of your work independently, but what were you most curious about as a child? Nissa.
Wow. What was I most curious about? I would say, honestly, freedom. You know, getting outside of the boundaries of the house. I grew up in a time where, you know, in the summers, if I wasn't off at summer camp, in the morning I was outside running around in the woods with my friends and just coming in to grab a meal, if even that. So I think that was, you know, I think my being outside and just spending time in nature.
Walter.
Exactly the same.
Really?
Yeah, turning over rocks. You know, what's under the rock? You know, what's behind the tree? What's on the other side of the hill? Yeah. I mean, it was constant exploration and outdoor exploration, constantly outdoors. And my mom, you know, says that, you know, the neighborhood kids don't play outside anymore, and it freaks me out.
Yeah, right. So similarities right away. So let's talk to you, Walter, just a little bit. You were a commercial photographer pretty quickly. How did you move into becoming the creator of the I Spy series?
Well, as a commercial photographer, I resisted a lot of the, you know, the traditional advertising type of work. Well, I didn't resist it. I didn't get it. But I was in New York at the time, and I did a lot of I had this notion of turning my pictures into visual puzzles. So I created some puzzles for Games Magazine, and that was something I could just do. I mean, if I got slow, I would just dream up some kind of puzzle with found objects and then pitch it to Games, and they would publish it. So so that was kind of a parallel track to the magazine covers and book covers I was doing, and the two never met, you know, in the same place. They were just completely parallel, although the visual styles might have been the same. And one day I got a call from Jean Marzolo, who asked me to do a poster for her, and it was in this kind of white background style that you see.
Right up.
It's not that image, but I had what I had done is I had been playing around in the studio with some hardware, some pins and needles, and just bits that you would find in a junk drawer. And I was intending to organize this work and these items, nuts and bolts and screws and pins and thumbtacks and all that kind of thing. And I liked the way it looked. I put it out on my light box to arrange it, and I liked the way the objects looked, so I spent the next 2 days just arranging the objects and taking a picture of it. And that became an ad for myself. And then Gene Marzullo saw the ad, called me and said, could you do a kindergarten poster in that same style of just fasteners? So I did this poster of fasteners, and then that poster in turn inspired an editor to call Gene, and they got us all together, and that's how I Spy started.
Great. And she wrote the kind of...
She wrote the
poet
rhymes based on the things that I hid in the pictures.
Right.
But what they hadn't known, neither Gene nor the editor at Scholastic, that I had been doing these games for Games Magazine for 10 years prior to that. They didn't know that.
Well, if you've chosen a couple of photographs, if we can go back to, so there's this one.
Right.
And then...
That's from the first I Spy book.
Right. And should we go to the letter?
Yeah. I chose these because I wanted to kind of underscore how kids respond to photography different than they might to painting. And the kids had a question about how I made those objects appear to float through the air, and they had 4 ideas. 1, you dropped the toys and took a quick picture. 2, you suspended the toys in gelatin. 3, you suspended the toys in clear plastic. And 4, you traveled to space and took the pictures in weightlessness.
Pretty smart kids.
So, what's going on, though, is... and I didn't really think about this when I did the first book, but for children. But we don't teach children the difference between photography and painting. We don't say, "Now, Johnny, this is a photograph," and that means that the objects really exist in real life, and the camera has captured that. You never teach kids that. They just seem to intuitively know the difference. So, therefore, they had questions regarding these objects that appeared to defy gravity. And their proposed solutions all involve the real physical world. So I just show that letter to introduce the idea that photography can engage the mind in a way differently than a painting would. And if you did a watercolor of that same scene of objects floating, I don't think kids would say, how did you make those objects float in the air? I mean, they might, but in general, you get the idea that there's a different way of engagement. And so that's kind of like the starting point for my work. But, I get off the track of that, but that's another story.
Right. Well, we'll talk more about the fantasies you create.
Yeah,
you
right.
create amazing fantasies and people figuring out.
Mm.
So let's switch back. We're going to switch back and forth, and some of these might make logical sense, and some of them might not. But we're going to explore Nissa's work for a minute now, because you also, in a way, I love the way Walter's things kind of look like they're exploding on the page, or at least that one, to some degree, but much of his things don't. But Nissa's certainly one of the things that people note about your work is that there's a sense of explosion. So why don't you guide us a little bit about where you're coming from with these kind of delicate things, but this explosion, this disintegration that's also seems to be part of your work.
Sure. Well, I guess to start off, one question that comes up a lot is why birds? And so the first time I actually started painting birds was about 4 years ago, when I wasn't showing my work. In fact, I wasn't even painting, and I think it was for my father's birthday. I decided to paint a number of small images of birds that he had seen on Moncton Pond. He's an avid bird watcher. And so I painted these very realistic looking birds, and he put them up in his living room. And a couple months go by, and I start getting trickles from people saying, "Hey, I was at your father's house. I saw those paintings of those birds. Why aren't you showing your work?" And and then, of course, I had taken pictures of it, and then realized that I really enjoyed painting birds. It was just fun, and it was getting me back into painting, which is why I originally went off to RISD. But there's something about that balance between the ultra realistic and the chaos. And I suppose to answer your question, when I go into a painting, I generally start with a realistic image or inspiration, and that often comes from photography. Photography that I've done on my own time, either at the Fairbanks Museum or with the Audubon Society, or friends who send me photos from their smartphone of roadkill. I've had that. So I'll start with a realistic image, and for me, the painting process is almost as explosive as the content itself. So I never plan out a painting. I don't sit down, I don't sketch it. I don't actually have an idea in my head before I sit down as to what it's going to look like, the end product. And so in that respect, the way I treat the paint itself and the way I go about completing a composition is one in which I'm sort of getting into a zone. I'm just letting it explode where it will. So I don't know if that really goes into the explosion part. And I don't necessarily see it as explosion either. I think that it's almost a disintegration in some ways, or I think the term explosion can have a very violent connotation to it. And sometimes I don't necessarily feel that way when I'm painting. It's almost like things are floating, almost like they're in a gel.
We can go to any of the other ones that you send here, but
Yeah.
Kim's doing a great job of kind of showing
Yeah.
some of your, it's almost caught.
Yeah, so in this sense, this doesn't feel as explosive to me as almost like tendrils, or there's aspects of the realistic bird that are kind of moving off into the outside of the composition itself. So I also like to think of my paintings as capturing a moment. So you could almost assume that this movement or explosion or disintegration would continue outside of what you're just seeing. So,
both of you, for me, get us to focus, to seek something, to question what's going on. It's not necessarily about beauty or being pleasing, but it really makes you think and makes you curious. It draws us in. And so why is that important to you? How does that aspect of, certainly your work is all about that, seeking.
Well, when you have kids as your audience, you don't want to lose them. You want them to stick with it. And so in this example here, I would say it's, in photographic terms, it's the most boring type of photography because it's just very flat catalog lighting. It's not very much dramatic lighting. You'll see that downstairs in the exhibition, but I purposely chose the white backgrounds here because I knew the room would be bright, so it would destroy any drama that I would have in the more dramatically lit pictures. But also the reason why I lit it so flat is because I wanted the mechanism of the machine that I made out of blocks and toys to be readable. So I'm trying to guarantee that kids will spend time with this picture. And the part of the way that they do that is with a search and find game. And so, okay, we got them with the search and find game. Find the marble, find the clothespin, find the hammer. But in the process of finding the objects in this particular picture, they also discover this machine. And I can tell you that I've gone into classrooms, like rooms the size of this, with children in the audience, and I've asked kids in the audience if they know what this machine does. And the hands all go up in the air, and I can get a kid to come up in the audience and describe exactly what goes on with 85 moving parts and the dramatic conclusion of popping the balloon. And some of these kids cannot yet read, but they can understand what's going on because there's fundamental cause and effect in, gravity and what happens. So it is not about drama in this particular case in terms of lighting. I'm trying to engage their intellect in another way through photography.
And just in case some of you are not familiar with Walter's other work, some of them are very rich. Like this is the inside of a shop with just tons of stuff, and there's always this riddle on the side of things you can look for. And of course, there are many more things than just what you're challenged with in the riddle. But some of these, I think, probably your studio is at least as large as this room, where you create some of these amazing structures, that are then photographs.
Yeah. So by using all these games, I'm cheating, by what I say by cheating, it's, I think Nissa has a tougher job of holding her audience in a way because she doesn't have that game aspect that guarantees that kids are going to spend some time, or the audience is going to spend the time looking.
Well, but your work, Nissa, I think also it's work that people investigate.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. I have to pull up, actually going back to sort of the idea of childhood and what's, a form of inspiration for me, and that is my father would take me out and my brother out in the woods and go through, and actually it was like every time we went into the woods, it was a field trip. We'd point out the different trees, we'd get down and look at animal scat and pick it apart with a piece of wood. We might come across some bones, and I think from a young age, my father and my mother certainly inspired this wonderment in things that are just out in nature, regardless if they're dead or alive. So we never got that sort of, ooh, it's dead. It was more like, ooh, look, it's dead. And so because of that, I just have an appreciation for things that have passed on, things that are still here. And actually, I suppose in painting them realistically, I allow people to get close to that, something that maybe not all people would bend down and look at. This painting, actually, for instance, this was a live subject. This was from the Tunbridge Fair. I went and photographed some of their prize roosters and whatnot. But actually, the other birds in the right corner, those were not alive. So it's always kind of a combination of both the living and things that I've found, and just being able to focus. And as I've worked on my paintings and have been evolving as an artist, I'm now not as squeamish about pulling my car to the side of the road and taking my iPhone out and taking a picture of maybe a hawk that's been hit by a car, and then running back to my car and using it as inspiration. So,
and just since we talked about white, which is not necessarily Walter's medium, though he sometimes does use a lot of white space, all of your paintings that I've known use a lot of white space, which seems minimalist, but also it's interesting going to China, and it reminds me of Asian art. What do you think that's about? That you have an incredible amount of restraint to.
I think
with that much white space, right?
I think it goes back again to the idea that I like the notion of capturing movement, and I feel that if I were to tackle a canvas and apply paint to all of it, I almost in some ways would box that movement in. That's why I don't sign my paintings on the front. People always ask me, why aren't your paintings signed? And again, I feel like it actually sets up and contains the movement. And so when I was first starting out with my painting just 4 years ago, I did have to hold back and say, you know what, I'm just going to let it be. This one, some of them do have more washes involved, but I think it also, again, draws focus to the subject matter. With all that white and the vibrancy of the colors, it allows people to, zoom in on exactly what I want them to, which is the bird or the action, the explosion.
So your process, Walter, you create so many amazing, fanciful worlds, feats of magic, all with reality, but they are magical. All of your stuff almost seems unreal, but it's absolutely bound in reality.
Well, improbable is the word
Thank you.
Yeah, for example, these objects are all actually balancing on that Lego block, and there's no hidden wires, there's no glue or stickum of any sort used, and I used temporary support to support the structure as I was building it, and I did a lot of practice runs. So, people say, how many times did it fall over? Well, I didn't count that, but I gave myself a week to do it, and I practiced during the week. So it was almost like a performance of, seeing what would balance, what would not balance, and so on. And then when it came to do this shot, I knew I had a plan, and then, like I say, I had temporary supports, so you could move objects on on a scale. And you could see the structure would lift itself off the support on one end and kind of like balance, and then you could take the supports away. And I photographed it very nervously, but then I used wind-up toys to try to knock it over, and I filmed it. And the wind-up toy, one of their little robots that hit the ball, knocked over the robot, and he just kept going like this. And the structure didn't fall over. And that's on the video downstairs. You'll see it. And then I used one of these pool balls, and I rolled it in and crashed it. And so that video is to prove that I didn't glue it, and so you could see that it was done. So that kind of speaks to all that, the business about, is this really what, is this a true photograph, and, and that's how I deal with it. But in compositionally, you're really restricted, because you're restricted by the logic of making everything balance. So you just can't, move stuff around at free will. You're really, really, really restricted.
Which is very much what you're doing with your other constructions.
Right.
You can move things around, and even some of the most remarkable ones to me, among many of them, are where you have mirrors and you are playing with them. So what is reflected is not necessarily correct. If you, how do you say this? So
Well,
you're playing tricks with this, and you're taking multiple pictures at a time, or are you moving the object? So in other words, there are mirrors in the image, but what is reflected is not necessarily what would be
yeah, that's a different type of
It's a whole nother
picture.
optical trick thing.
Yeah.
You're constantly testing yourself as well as the kids.
I'm testing the audience because I'm afraid that they're going to walk away from my picture, so I'm trying to glue them to it. But something like this I can't sketch. I can sketch it, but it's a meaningless sketch because I don't know if the things that I would in my mind would balance. But some of the more elaborate scenes, I sketch first, like a storyboard. And then, because otherwise I can't work with the model makers to decide what we're going to build. We can't just do it. But some of the things that I've shown here with the floating objects, I don't sketch that. I work more like Nissa in the way that I just kind of see what happens as I go along. I'm using objects as my compositional elements and moving them, juxtapositioning them, and trying different things.
So this is more of a solo. So some of your work take a crew of 6, and some it's you working with these objects.
Yeah, some of it is just I take a pile of objects and sculpt it with it, And some of it I have to, if I'm telling a story, I have to figure out how I'm going to economize the objects and use them to tell the story. And then we have to build models too, and then everything's got to fit to scale and all that stuff. It's very complicated.
Well, just quickly, and I'm sorry, I'll get back to Nissa, but since you mentioned story, a delightful book is this one about the princess and the robot.
Yeah.
If unlikely to, a princess and a robot, how did that kind of come about? Because this is a story, even though it's still a search and find, you've created a whole storyline with it.
Right. It's a narrative that's told essentially like a wordless picture book. So you can discern the story just by looking at the pictures. And the text has the game of search and find, but it also reinforces the story. The title of the pictures reinforce it, and the rhyme, the elements you look for reinforce it. But it doesn't tell a story in the traditional sense. If you took the pictures away, the rhymes would be nonsensical.
Right.
But the inspiration for this story became when I went to a toy store, like a big box toy store. I realized all the boys' toys were in one aisle and all the girls' toys were in another aisle. So you had like this big aisle of pink over here and another aisle of blue over here. And I actually was at a book signing, and because I was at a toy store book signing, it's always a dangerous thing because the toys are much more attractive than some old dude signing books. So there wasn't much to do. And and I was just kind of musing on this, and I sort of forgot about it. And I was working on another idea for a book, and I had this princess and a robot miniature on my desk, and the juxtaposition of the two things. I actually was on the phone with my editor saying the book I was working on was not going anywhere. And I said, how about a princess and a robot, as I was looking at it. And they said, that sounds good, and that's how that book started.
Juxtapositions. I want to go back to Nissa's painting. It is a great story of the airplane and the grosbeaks.
Mm-hmm.
So this is an interesting juxtaposition.
Right.
And you also sometimes have hammers or a pistol. It seems like a much more literal
Yeah.
reference to destruction. But what's going on here?
Well, the history behind this painting was I was actually this was a couple summers ago, and I had gone through a bunch of paintings of birds and was just sort of feeling like, I need a break from birds. So I actually turned to good old Facebook and social media, and I put a post out and asked people, hey, if there was anything you wanted to see me explode, what would it be? And and then I said, the comment to that post that gets the most likes, I wanted to do this quickly, you know, and I kind of felt that I was really looking to get some ideas, that I had some ideas, but I wanted to hear what people had to say. And so actually a friend of mine said, I want to see like an old airplane. And then a bunch of people said, yeah, let's see that. So it so happened that a friend of mine had actually just been up in that very airplane, and she had taken a bunch of photographs of it and sent me the photographs. And then I had just come back, I believe, from the Fairbanks Museum and had done some photography, and that's where that bird came from. But I think it's just my interest in seeing how I can push myself. And there's something really attractive to me about that juxtaposition of something that's very rigid and very industrial and very man-made, and something that is so far from us as human beings in terms of birds, this delicacy, this something that flies through the air that we have not constructed. And so I think when I start to bring in inanimate objects into my paintings, it's really my looking at that, and maybe in some ways there's a bit of narrative coming out, a conversation between, You know, these things that we don't have as much a hold on, if you will, and the things that we're constructing. And sometimes those, you know, my paintings can appear to be, there's almost like an unsettling quality to them because of that, because of this rigid industrial feel. Or for instance, I have one painting that has a Dillinger in it, an old antique Dillinger that my father had actually built when he was a kid from a kit that I'd photographed. And so that's basically what I'm doing when I bring in these inanimate objects. So.
Well, and this brings another curiosity, and I'm going to turn it over to you all in just a minute. I have just a few more questions. So this is a beautiful book, quite different. This is a drop of water, and if you want to know what water is and the magic and mystery of water, just pick up this book, which used lasers to help catch this drop and other things. So what inspired this book, Walter? These are beautiful.
Well, the idea of a drop of water was to explain science, or to introduce science of water, or the behavior of water, the physical properties of water, basically, to a young audience by focusing on just a very small quantity of water. So in the book you see a splashing drop, you see a soap bubble, you see snowflakes, close-up jewel-like snowflakes, and some experiments of evaporation, steam, so on. And but the inspiration from the book comes from a collection of 19th century science books, which my wife was an antique dealer for a while, and we'd go to these antique shows, and I wouldn't, and sometimes up here and up in New England to rummage through antique shops and so on. And I would focus on something that would interest me, and I got this collection of science books from the 19th century, and it was very common then to talk about a scientific principle by just focusing on one small thing, like a lump of coal, or a drop of water, or soap bubbles, or a candle flame. And so I just sort of picked up on this idea that trying to show, instead of showing like Niagara Falls and things that are way out of scale to a book, try to show the physical phenomenon that's happening, that's almost like one-to-one, or even closer to the scale of the book itself. So I think you feel more intimate towards the subject when it's relatable and it's just so close up to you.
And you had to figure out how to do all these, including Snowflake Bentley helped you out with this.
That's right. In one of my old books, I have an article by Wilson Bentley, who was from Jericho, Vermont, and he described how to capture snowflakes and photograph them in a popular science magazine from 1925. And his technique was to use a feather to scoop up the snowflake, a feather like from one of your birds. Because it makes sense, because feathers are designed not to conduct heat. And so, you have something very delicate and that's not going to warm up to your hand very easily. So you pick up a feather and move the snowflakes around with that.
And probably for Nissa, I have two last questions, but we'll do that much later. You're a very busy professional educator. What does painting kind of free up for you? You talked to me about having a very structured life, and these are not about being structured.
Well, yes, so I'm a high school teacher, as Fran had mentioned before. And in that part of my life, I do have to structure and compartmentalize a lot of what I do in terms of curriculum development. I also do quite a bit of work on the district level, just in terms of e-portfolios, and I'm on a number of committees. And so you're on all the time, and you're also working with a variety of populations, so your colleagues and parents and students. And so painting for me sort of allows myself to, again, just let go of any process, if you will. So that's why my paintings are explosive in their process, as I mentioned. It's very meditative, and I know that sounds very cliche as well, but there's something nice about being chaotic, because I certainly cannot be chaotic as an educator. I mean, I could be, but sometimes it is chaotic. I teach adolescents, so. But it's a nice balance for me. Certainly gives me a break, and a lot of times when I'm painting, I will, kind of go through in my head. I'll find myself going through in my head. Okay, in terms of that lesson I did today, or okay, what do I have to do tomorrow in terms of getting ready, ready for these assessments or final projects, and I have to actually force myself to stop, and so it can be difficult at times. It's not easy being creative. It's very difficult to be creative, especially if you're under a deadline or you're used to setting your life up as a schedule, because you can't always turn on and off that creative switch. So in the past, I've had times where I look at my week and I say, okay, I have 2 hours on Tuesday night, and then I have maybe an hour and a half, before I go to bed to paint. And sometimes that's all I have. And then come Tuesday night, I'm just exhausted. It's been a long day at the high school. I've been there till 6 o'clock, and by the time I eat. So it can be tricky, but at the same time, I'm really grateful, because I think they both balance each other. And I think that I'm successful in my teaching endeavors and being able to appreciate the creative process of my students because of my own creative process. And in the business end of art, I think I'm more organized and structured because of how my teaching career works.
Well, so you're nodding a lot, and you have this incredibly playful side and a very sophisticated.
Everybody says they want to do my job or they want to work for me. They don't want to work for me. I say my job is to make a mess, and yours is to clean it up. But seriously, I was nodding because, Nissa said you can't just turn it on or turn it off, and that's so true. I mean, if I go out and travel for a few days, and I come back, it takes me 2 days to get back into it, and it can be really discouraging, and it's really hard work. When you have the idea, and you have this wonderful idea, that's one thing. But when you actually start to put pen to paper, or I don't literally do that, but when you start to physically build it and it starts to go wrong, it's like, oh no. And almost anything would be more fun than continuing.
Yeah.
Now that you know their talents, their challenges, questions from the audience. What did these two wonderful artists bring up for you in terms of curiosity about them? Yes, right
I'm
here.
just curious about what is her medium? What are you?
I use gouache. So
What is
gouache is similar to a watercolor,
okay.
and some of these are done on a very thick, what's called 3-ply cotton press paper, and some are done on panels that I've treated. So, yeah.
And Kim has the microphone, so she's going to be running around trying to find y'all. This gentleman right here.
Oh, do I need that? Oh,
For RITN, there's an audience.
Hi.
That wants to see this later.
Nissa, I was curious about, did you take, like art classes of any kind, drawing classes, painting classes? I was kind of curious.
I think since I entered kindergarten, yes. Yeah, it's been a passion of mine ever since I could, pick up crayons and markers. So certainly, and I did go to RISD for painting and illustration and switched my major. So, but yeah.
To film, which is
To
maybe
film.
a whole other question. But,
Everybody might not know RISD's the Rhode Island School.
Rhode Island School of Design, yes, sorry. Yep.
Nissa, just a quickie for you. Did you, in your younger life, ever have an interesting experience trying to roll up old, rusty chicken wire?
Good spy.
Great question. You know, I've probably snagged winter jackets on chicken wire more times than I can count as a kid. I mean, but actually, this is just chicken wire I found out in the woods. I think this was just actually a year and a half ago. You know, you're walking along in the woods on a trail, and you kind of have to pick your way around it and watch where you're stepping. I think most people growing up in Vermont can conjure up that image. Yeah.
It's a good question because it looks so abstract, but she gets the detail of chicken wire or the way it's wrapped up in there. So it's, with a wound up thing.
Hi, this is for Nissa. So Nissa, I'm Nissa's mom. So I have a question. Because growing up, we had a dead bug cemetery in the house. So I'm wondering when you're going to start painting bugs.
Well, I already have a painting with bugs.
Well,
I think I have a couple.
Oh, do you?
But it is true. We did have a little place in our house, and my mom actually started this. She would find butterflies or dragonflies that were intact, and honestly, if you were to walk in my living room in my apartment, a couple of my bookshelves have butterflies and dragonflies, and a lot of them come from friends of mine who say, hey, look what I found. You got to add it to your bug collection. So
also, I'm really intrigued by your work, and this is for Walter.
Yeah.
Yes. And with my son, who is 6 years younger than Nissa, we read a lot of I Spies, and they just, because we did a lot of curiosity outside, like uncovering rocks and everything. So, I haven't seen one of your books in a while because a lot of our books are packed away. So I'm going to look at them today after and probably purchase one. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a question right here. Thanks, Kim.
I had a question for Walter Wick. I wanted to know if you still have fun sometimes.
Oh, yes, I do. Did I seem like I was really stressed when I said it was a lot of work? It's fun when I'm done. But sometimes I try to build in the fun, in the sense that I know that aspects of what I'm going to do is going to be hard, but I try to choose my projects so that there'll be some joy in it. And one of the things that I like the most is in that free form kind of arranging of thing. And I would agree with the meditative thing. And that's, if I have a table of things I'm just arranging into kind of a jumble, an artistic jumble, I can talk to a friend or a staff member about movies. And I don't have to think about what I'm doing. I can actually have a side conversation and do it almost very, very intuitively, and that's the most fun for me. Having a conversation. Yeah. But when I'm building these narratives and these structured sets and everything, that's when it gets very, very complicated.
Hi, this is for Walter. I was just wondering, the I Spy books are often on a theme, and did you come up with a theme with the author, or did you and the author work together to create a theme to make your I Spy
The
books?
I Spy books, after the first book, the publisher said, why don't you do a Christmas book? And that was the first theme that we did. And after that, we would just riff together, and we would just, Jean and I would talk about possibilities. And I'd throw things out. I would like to try to be the lead on the idea, simply because when you're working with physical objects, I have to know what the potential was. In other words, I had to be confident that I could actually do the theme throughout for 12 pictures and have variety within the book, and I could get all the stuff for that. A lot of kids would write in and say, could you do one on sports? And I was never confident that I could do a whole book on sports, because there's so many licensed things and goods like Yankees and this and that. So I could do one page on sports, but not a whole book on sports. So the themes were always mitigated by the fact that, can I do it?
And then your Can You See What I See books are all you. You are the author and the illustrator.
Yes, yes. So those are all my themes.
I Spy books that you collaborate
Yeah,
on.
we collaborate on the themes, right.
Okay.
Hi, my question is for Walter. I'm really intrigued by the composition in your photos, and my question is about what, if any, role children have played in those, either giving you ideas or inspiration, or have they ever designed any or part of a composition of a photo?
Well, have children designed the composition? No. But kids have suggested ideas that have eventually become, incorporated into one of my books. Children make their own I Spy games and stuff, and what you don't realize is that when it looks like chaos, it really isn't. It's very organized, structured, purposefully. Everything's got to be turned just the right way to read correctly and to not look like it's been turned to read correctly. So there's that kind of balance of trying to make it seem like things have just been thrown down, and that the photographer didn't play a role in the composition at all. And some of my favorite pictures don't feel like they're actually composed. It looks like I arrived at a place and took a picture, but they actually have been carefully composed.
One or two more, and then I'll have my final question. Did you have a question? Yeah.
I have actually a question for each. Am I going to hog too much time? Walter, you obviously didn't design the books to help children improve their visual acuity. You addressed earlier that that's something that comes naturally to them. But there's a strong literacy component to them, and I know that that's not sort of your part of the collaboration, not as the writer. But my children read the board book versions a great deal, and I'm fairly confident that it helped with their early reading. Is that just a fortunate byproduct, or was that intentional?
Well, no, it's not a byproduct. It's intentional to. Well, first of all, when I worked with Jean on I Spy, she's an educator, so she was very. We did the first book without really planning anything. I did the photos, hid the objects, and she wrote the rhymes. There was discussion before that, and there was discussion during the process. But once the book came out, we realized how rich it was for educational purposes. And she was the one who was able to articulate that to the wider world about its educational value and vocabulary, visual discrimination skills, and all that kind of stuff. So, when it came to doing school days, we didn't just want to do a nostalgic book on school days. There's really some really cool educational concepts behind some of the work that we did with letters, numbers, and so on. So with my other books, Can You See What I See, and A Drop of Water, and Optical Tricks, I learned a lot from Jean in terms of making it really smart, not just rearranging objects and slapping a riddle down on it. There's a lot of depth. There's illusions, there's stories, there's cause and effect machine, there's all these different other things to think about. And I want that thinking, cerebral part of it to be part of the game. The game is just the kind of hook to get them into these other worlds.
Yeah, many, many layers in these books.
Yeah.
Your other quick question?
Yeah, Nissa, can you talk a little bit about the juxtaposition between the ethereal and ephemeral part of your paintings and the parts that are somewhat unsettling and maybe even border on references to something that's violent, or the explosiveness is not just explosive, but that there's sort of damage?
Yeah. It's interesting because I often don't, when I'm painting these, realize how violent they may appear until I'm done. And I think going back to the overarching theme of curiosity, I think we look at death and the dissection of things that have once been living, like bits and pieces coming out, as being very violent. And in some ways, I actually see it as being somewhat beautiful, not actually personally pulling things apart, because that's morbid and kind of gross. But the actual, I guess, dissection of it, and how I dissect it through paint, and haven't actually gone in and done it physically. So I guess it's interesting because I just have never seen it. For me personally, I haven't seen it as being violent, and maybe this is going back to some of my background as a student at the Rhode Island School of Design, where we did a lot of still lifes. We did a lot of figure drawing. We did a lot of still lives involving taxidermied animals, and having to look at it. And almost, if you think about Da Vinci and that marrying of the sciences and the arts. And so in terms of how that might become a bit, I guess, unsettling or violent is really just my pushing the boundary, I suppose. And maybe, again, that's a dialogue between my very structured career as a teacher and feeling like I need to be able to let loose a little bit. So I don't know if that answered your question, but.
It's just 5 o'clock, so I'm going to wrap up with just one quick question for each of our wonderful guests. There, I think there's going to be a little reception. Oh, sure. There's going to be a reception out here, so we hope that you stay out there. The show, Walter Wick Show, will not open until Friday, so we all hope you return to the museum because it's a spectacular show. I could only peek in the windows myself, but I know Walter's very happy with it, and it'll be worth coming back here. Also, just know, it's not easy for artists to talk about their work or to talk much. That's not why they're artists. So I also really want to commend these two for being so articulate and so open to us about their work, and we'll applaud them in a minute while I ask my final questions. For Walter, what's next for you? Because you're moving into a different phase from these very large constructed pieces, I hear.
Yeah, I'm kind of hitting the reset button. I've done like 20 of these books, and I want to try to get back to that kind of joy of arranging that I was describing earlier. And I have a new book coming out, in this spectacular book coming out in the fall. And I'm really not sure. I have so many different opportunities. The publisher wants me to do a book called A Ray of Light, to follow up to that, Drop of Water, which is now 17 years old. But I want to play first. I don't want to lock myself into a project. I want to get back into just that freedom, you know, that you're describing.
Terrific. Thank you. And Nissa, what are you most interested in exploring in China?
Well, that's a great question. I'm most excited about, I have an opportunity, I've been invited to be an artist in residence with an arts organization called Dawang Cultural Highlands Center. And part of the artist residency program is that you're given room, you're given a studio, and then you're also partnered with a local artist. And so when I went through the application process and proposed some project ideas, I had mentioned that I was specifically interested in calligraphy style of painting. So if you think of traditional Chinese art and how very detailed and very, there's a protocol to it almost. And yet then you have the mixture of the washes and whatnot. And so I'm really excited to partner with a mentor in China, a calligrapher artist, and learn some of those techniques and work with different mediums too. So
wonderful. I want to thank you both, and I also want to say, you know, nobody asked, Walter, how did you do X? Which he told us some of, which is what everybody wants to know, but know that Walter is so generous. If you go to his website or the back of his books, other places, he tells you exactly how he does these magical things. Very, very generous about all that. Walter Wick, Nissa Kauppila, thank you so much. It's really been a great pleasure. And thank you to Shelburne Museum, Shelburne Farms, All Souls, and the Shelburne Library, and RATN for this wonderful series in March. Thank you all for coming, and have a great day. Thank you very much.